DJ scream, heavy in the streets.
We gon' get it, we gon' get it, we gon' get it. We gon' get it, we gon' get it. Get it in blood. Get it in blood. We gon' get it, we gon' get it, we gon' get it. We gon' get it, we gon' get it. Get it in blood. Get it in blood.
Good rich.
Good evening, everyone, and welcome to Saints and Appetizers podcast. And this evening here, we have some appetizers for you. And what am I talking about? I'm talking about UFC 292, Sterling versus O'Malley, and this is going to be the prediction show. And before I get into any of this, I want to shout out some people. Just new subscribers. I've had about 7 new subscribers since my last video, my last podcast, which it was New Orleans Saints based, but still, if those same people that recently subscribed will end up watching this, I just want to shout them out, and I appreciate those people subscribing and, you know, likes and shares, comments, anything like that. I appreciate it. It helps the channel. And at the beginning of the first show, or beginning of the last show, which was my 101 podcast, I kind of mentioned that I just posted my 100th podcast and that this was the 101. And, you know, I appreciate everyone that made that podcast, the 101 podcast. It kind of blew up, you know, it had more views than I usually get, and it had more likes than I usually get. So I really want to just shout out all those people, and I appreciate it. And I just want to keep growing, keep getting views, likes, all that is really great. And then also I want to shout out MJ DeVillier for he shouted out, he commented, he said he loved the stash. So, you know, if you've been following, you know we grow a mustache, we grow a mean mullet here. Money making mullet, and when the NFL season starts, I'm sorry for some of y'all that love the mustache so much. It's going to come off, and we're going to start growing a beard for the winter and for the football season. So we'll have a big beard by the time the Super Bowl and Pro Bowl, all that business comes around. But anyways, let's get into this card here. It's a pretty good one, actually. You know, I wouldn't say it's great, but you know, it's got some superstars, you know, depending on if you like Sean O'Malley or Sterling. But anyways, let's get in this. So can I get a menu? And so this is a UFC 292 Sterling versus O'Malley, and this is August 19th, 2023. 2023, which is this Saturday coming up. This event is going to be at the TD Garden in Boston, Massachusetts, United States, and that's actually what this is from. I don't know if you can see it. I think it says Boston right there. This is a TNA Impact Wrestling Slammiversary from all the way back in 2013 when I actually lived up in Boston for a short period of time. So I know a little bit about Boston. I know a little bit about Boston folks, and it's kind of surprising that the UFC hasn't had an event in Boston in a little while, but they're finally back, and all their fans are passionate and crazy. And I don't think this event here, this was like a pay-per-view as well for TNA Impact Wrestling, but I can't remember. This obviously that was like 10 years ago. I can't remember if that was I don't think it was held in the TD Garden, so I can't say I know anything about the TD Garden or have seen any Boston Celtics games or New England Patriots games. That's something I kind of regret from when I lived up in Boston, not taking advantage of at least going and seeing those teams play. Even though I'm not really a fan, it would have been an experience. But sure, it would have cost money, a decent amount of money at times, especially during that 2013 season. I guess the Patriots didn't win the Super Bowl in 2013. They won it the next year. But anyways, let's get into the first fights on these cards, and we're changing it up a little bit here because a lot of times when I do these prediction shows or reaction shows, I really only go over the main card, the main pay-per-view card. But I got a little bit invested in some of these preliminary cards, the second preliminary, the main preliminary cards, because I actually watched I guess it was the UFC Tough 31, I think. They're all the way on to 31. I actually watched for the first time since like the first couple seasons, like maybe 4 or 5 seasons. It's the first time I actually watched Tough. So I got a little invested because I watched that season, and Brad Katona and Cody Gibson, Austin Hubbard, and Kurt Hollabaugh all fight. So I guess it's the finals for their two weight classes. So they're the first two fights on the preliminary card. So uh, I'll just more. It's probably, I guess, not who I think is going to win, but really who I want to win, because it's a reality TV show, and you watch it over the course of a month or two, and you're like, oh, I like this guy because I like his style, or I like his attitude, but I don't like this guy because he's too cocky or arrogant. So it's more of that than what I think about these guys' quality of ability, I guess. So it's more, this is some reality TV show, these first three fights. But anyways, let's get to the first fight on the preliminary card. It would be the ESPN Plus card. You don't have to have like UFC Fight Pass or anything like you do for the early prelims. So the first fight on this card is a bantamweight bout between Brad Katona versus Cody Gibson. Let's see. So they broke these fights up and teams up to like the veteran fighters and the non-veteran fighters, like the up and coming fighters. And Michael Chandler got all the veteran fighters, and Conor McGregor got all like the rookie up and coming fighters. And I think it's the first time ever that like every fighter on one team has like made it to the finals, and like at the very end it was like the semifinals that there was only one Conor McGregor fighter left. So all these fighters are fighting for, I guess, the respect and honor of Michael Chandler's team, and obviously they to get a UFC contract and be able to say I won Tough 31. But none of these guys are Conor McGregor's guys. All Conor McGregor's guys all lost, and he's not even going to be at this show. But so the first fighter here we're talking about is Brad Katona. So Brad Katona, he actually won UFC Ultimate Fighter back. I don't know which one it was. It was back in 2018, July 2018. He actually already won an Ultimate Fighter finale. So I think he's the first. He'll be the first. If he wins this, he'll be the first like repeat champion. And so he had some fights in the UFC. Obviously won the one that was on the finale show, but then won another one, but then kind of had a little rough go and lost like two in a row, and then hadn't fought in the UFC in a while. But he is six. He's 4-2 in his last six, and the two that he lost were both his last UFC fights before he got kind of outed out of the UFC. But then he's won his last 4 fights. So he's on a 4-fight winning streak, but none of them are UFC fights. They're all Brave FC, which until right now, I don't know if I've ever even heard of Brave FC, but I can't say that I'm a hardcore like MMA fan where I'm watching all the other promotions. I'm pretty much, I guess you call me casual, but I'm strictly UFC for the most part. But he has a good record. I mean, his only 2 losses were in the UFC, so maybe he needed some time to marinate. But he is 14 matches, 14. It's been in 14 fights, has 12 wins, 2 losses. In the 12 wins, he has 1 win by knockout, 1 win or 3 wins by submission, and 8 decision wins by decision. And then in the 2 losses, they just were, I guess, kind of just drag out. decision losses. Just can't say I watched either one of those fights. Not neither one of them were on pay-per-view, so I can't say I watched them fights if they were close fights or not. And then he is fighting Cody Gibson. Cody Gibson, who I guess is also more of a UFC veteran or has fought in the UFC. He fought all the way. It's been a long time actually since he fought in the UFC, all the way back in 2015. His first fight was February 2022. February 22nd on 2014. So almost 10 years ago that he's fought in the UFC. And I guess he was just a talent that made it on there. He wasn't a previous Ultimate Fighter or anything like that. Let's see. And he has a similar record in his last 4 fights, and that's not including the Ultimate Fighter fights, which I guess people kind of consider exhibition. So both of them are obviously they're 2-0 to have gotten this opportunity to fight each other and win the tough. But so he is 4-2 in his last fights, and he's won his last fight, but lost the previous one to that. And that's just all different kinds of promotions that he's fought in since he fought in the UFC. But he's 27, has 27 fights with 19 wins and 8 losses, 7 wins by knockout, 4 by submission, and 8 by decision. And then in the 8 losses, he has 4 losses by submission and 4 losses by decision. So they got a pretty even matchup. I think these guys are kind of similar fighters, honestly. I think they're kind of ground fighters, kind of just drag it out and win kind of fighters. They're not particularly strikers. I definitely remember in the last fight to get on the tough. It was the tough finale show. Cody Gibson really just pretty much dominated Rico Descalio on the ground and just beat him up on the ground and arm triangle choked him at the end. But thing I do know, it's just like I said, it's kind of reality TV show. That's what the whole show's about. It's partially what the show's about. I definitely didn't think this season was good as any of the past seasons I watched for like the first 4 or 5 seasons. But I'm gonna go with Brad Katona, just mainly because I like the guy, and I think these fighters are pretty equal. And then also Cody Gibson, at least while on the show, I don't know how much time there is between the fights and the reality TV show and the actual finale, but he had a knee injury. I think he had a partially torn MCL or something like that. I doubt there was enough time in between that fight and in this card. So that was the air date was August 15th, June 6th for the first fight. So that doesn't tell you exactly when it was, but I seriously doubt that he had the surgery to fix the MCL that he had torn. But I'm just going to go with Brad Katona to win this. And let's see. He's had 3 submissions with this. I imagine Brad Katona will either win this by decision or it will be submission, because Cody Gibson has been submitted 4 times in his career. All right, so let's go to the second fight on the preliminary card. This is going to be a long podcast because we usually don't go over this much, these many fights. So the next one is Austin Hubbard versus Kurt Hollabaugh. And so Kurt Hollabaugh, I'm trying to see, when did he fight back in the UFC? So he fought all the way back in the UFC. His first fight in the UFC was 2019, and then the last fight was 2021. So it hadn't been that long ago since Austin Hubbard has fought in the UFC. He also and since then, he's only had 2 fights in 2022. He hasn't had an actual sanctioned fight uh, this year in 2023, but he's 2-0 in his last 2 fights, and he has had 21 fights with 15 wins, 6 losses, and in the out of the 15 wins, he's had 5 wins by knockout, 2 by submission, and 8 by decision. And then the 6 losses, he's had two uh, 2 losses by decision and 4 losses, two losses by submission and 4 losses by decision. Okay, and then this one is easier for me. This pick is a little easier for me. This fight is because Kurt Hollabaugh, he's actually from Louisiana. He's from Denham Springs, Louisiana, and he actually has like a fleur-de-lis tattooed on the back of one of his elbows or back here. So that kind of makes it a little easy for me to pick who I want to win. But we'll go over his fight history a little bit too. And he fought back in the UFC in 2018, and then his last fight in the UFC was 2019, and he uh, had a fight with had a fight on the UFC, Dana White's UFC Contender show. The series, actually the first one back in July 11, 2017. But he won that fight over Matt Bassett, but it got overturned because I guess he had used IV to rehydrate. And then the 3 following fights that he had after that, he lost all 3 of them. So you can see why he didn't last in the UFC, but he's getting a second chance now, at least to maybe say he won the Tough 31 finale and maybe get a couple fight contract. But he's on a 2-fight win streak, and both those fights came by knockout. And he's has 27 fights with 19 wins and 7 losses. In those 19 fights, he has 7 wins by knockout, 9 by submission, and 3 by decision. And then he has 1 loss by knockout, 1 by submission, and 5 by decision. And then he has just a 1 no contest, which is the one where he obviously was using IV to rehydrate, which with you saw it. You can't be doing all that business. But he similar to these guys, because these guys are all like ex-UFC fighters. They're all seasoned vets. It's kind of hard to pick these. So he has quite a few. Kurt Hollabaugh, he has quite a few submission wins, and Austin Hubbard is lost by submission 2 times. So similar to the first fight on the preliminary card between Austin Hubbard and Kurt Hollabaugh. I would say it's probably going to go to decision, or Kurt Hollabaugh is going to get the submission, either decision or submission win by Kurt Hollabaugh. But I got to go. It wouldn't be Saints and Appetizers podcast if I didn't go with the hometown boy, Kurt Hollabaugh. All right, now moving on to the third fight on the preliminary card. It's a fight between it's a middleweight bout between Gregory Rodriguez versus Dennis Tutelin. And let's see. So in Rodriguez's last 6 fights, he's 4-2 in his last 6 fights as well, and he has an pretty impressive record in some of those fights. His last 3 wins were all wins by knockout, 2 by knockout, 1 by TKO. But then in his last fight, at UFC 283, he got knocked out. But shows that he's got some knockout ability, and he's had 19 fights as well. It seems like a lot of these fighters have a lot of the similar experience. So he has 19 fights with 14 wins and 5 losses. 9 of his wins come by knockout, 3 by submission, and 2 by decision. And then the losses, he's been knocked out 3 times, and he's had 2 wins by decision. So seems like he's more of a striker, knockout artist, either knock you out or get knocked out type of fighter. Dennis Tutalin, he's a Russian fighter, and he doesn't have the greatest record in the world. He's just 3-3 in his uh, last 6 fights, and he lost his last fight by technical submission, rear naked choke. And then the previous fight to that, he won by TKO, knees and punches. But his overall record is not the greatest. He has let's see, 18 fights, 10 wins with 9 knockouts, and no submissions, 1 decision, and then 7 losses. So he has almost as many losses as he does wins, and he's been knocked out once, submitted 4 times, and a decision twice, and then he has a no contest. So kind of similar to Rodriguez in the sense that he's going to try to knock you out, but really can't do much else. But he hasn't been really knocked out himself, so it's kind of a tough fight to pick. Once again, I think these guys are kind of similar fighters and do the same thing. Looking for that knockout. And Gregory Rodriguez has been knocked out more often, but has had a couple submissions wins, and Tutalin has been submitted a couple times. Yeah, pulled up here. He's been submitted 4 times, so I think I'm going to go with Gregory Rodriguez to win this by submission. All right, so let's move on here to so this is the main event, of the preliminary card, and we're past the kind of the lesser known fighters, unless you watch UFC, the tough UFC 31, but we're getting into some big names here now, or used to be big names, but we're getting into the middleweight. This is a middleweight bout. This is the 4th card, the 4th fight on the preliminary card, the main event for it. And that's a middleweight bout between Chris Weidman versus Brad Tavares. And Chris Weidman, he hasn't fought since he had just such a coincidental, couldn't even make this kind of stuff up, that, he's the guy that beat Anderson Silva for the first time, and Anderson Silva broke his leg, and then he turns around, and years later he ends up breaking his leg almost identically in the same way. The leg completely snapped and wrapped around when Uriah Hall checked his kick, and the same thing happened, just in reverse with Anderson Silva. But and he hasn't been great in his last 6 fights. He's 3-3 in his last 6 fights, and obviously the last fight that he had was April 24th, 2021, and it was a TKO leg injury to Uriah Hall, and it happened within just like the first 17 seconds of the fight. And then his last win was the previous fight to that, which was August 8th, 2020, to Omar Akhmadov, and that was just a decision win. And just seriously, this is his first fight back. This will be 2 years since he broke his leg, but to be honest, he was never really hasn't really been the same fighter since he got lost his middleweight belt to Luke Rockhold, and that was back in December 12th, 2015. He got TKO punches by Luke Rockhold, just got kind of manhandled by Luke Rockhold. And really, in my opinion, I don't think he ever really looked the same after that. So I can't imagine he's going to look great coming back with a 2 year layoff after compound fracturing, breaking his leg. But he's had 21 fights himself, 15 wins, 6 losses, in the uh, in the 15 wins he's had 6 wins by knockout, 4 by decision, 4 by submission, and 5 by decision. And then all of his losses, all 6 losses, have been knocked out. So if he's going to get beat, he's going to get knocked out. So, but he can beat you in a variety of ways, striking and wrestling. But his main thing is definitely wrestling. That's his main strength. He's an all-American wrestler, but I just don't see that he's, uh, can be anywhere close to as good as he was when he was fighting and beating Anderson Silva and having his title fight with Luke Rockhold. I just don't. I just didn't see how old is he? He's got to be up in his 30s. Yeah, he's 39 years old, so he's almost 40 years old as well. So it's like the age, the injury, all of that is just not a good, doesn't add up to be anything good. But he's fighting Brad Tavares, who I wouldn't say that he's had a great stretch in his last 6 fights either, because he's only 2-4 in his last 6 fights. So maybe the UFC is trying to give Chris Weidman a gimme fight or something. I really don't know, but he's lost his last 2 fights. One by TKO punches and then one by decision. So he hasn't had a real hot stretch lately either. So kind of interesting how UFC matchmakers work things and decide who's going to fight. But he's had 27 fights, 19 wins, 8 losses, and not 9 wins or 5 wins by knockout, 2 by submission, and 12 by decision. So he can get in deep waters. He can go the whole fight. He can go all 4 rounds. I don't think he's been in a 5 round fight once. But then in the 8 losses, he's been knocked out 4 times and then lost by decision 4 times, and that adds up to 8. And I'm just, Brad Tavares, obviously he's kind of more of a striker. I think he's a little more of a striker than Chris Weidman is a wrestler. And just because of all the stuff weighing against Chris Weidman, age and everything, Brad Tavares is only 35, so he's a little bit younger. But just I think things are just kind of stacked against Chris Weidman to win this. So I'm going to go with Brad Tavares to win this by knockout. I think something will happen. I think Chris Weidman will pull up with some other kind of injury, or he just won't be able to go in deep waters, go all 3 rounds. I just don't see that happening. But it'll be really overcoming. He'll really overcome all of his demons and issues that he's had in the last couple of years if he does pull this off. It'll be a phenomenal outcome if he does. All right, so that's enough of the preliminary card, and I'll just go through this real quick again, so I don't have to try to go through it and remember all my picks through all the way through the main card. So in the first bout on the preliminary card, I have bantamweight bout between Brad Katona versus Cody Gibson, and I have Brad Katona winning this either by submission or decision win. And then in the second fight on the preliminary card is a lightweight bout between Austin Hubbard versus Kurt Harbaugh. And I'm going with I got to go with the guy that's got the fleur-de-lis on the back of his arm. And same thing. I think Kurt Harbaugh is going to win this by submission or decision. And then in the third fight on the preliminary card, got Gregory Rodriguez versus Dennis Tutolin. And I'm going with Gregory Rodriguez to win this by submission. And then the main event on the preliminary card is the fourth fight is the middleweight bout between Chris Weidman versus Brad Tavares, and I'm going with Brad Tavares to win that by knockout. I think just with the age and all the injuries, something's going to happen to Chris Weidman. He's gonna fold. All right, now then, what most of y'all are here for is the main event. It's usually starting at 9 Eastern time. So if you're in the central area like I am, it'll be on at 9 p.m. The main event. So main event, we have on the first fight on the main event, the main card, we have a bantamweight bout between Marlon Vera versus Pedro Munez, and this fight kind of has a little bit of history about it because both of these fighters, Pedro Munez and Marlon Vera, have both fought Sean O'Malley, who's on the main card, who's the main event of this card, and he's fighting for the belt. And one of them beat Sean O'Malley, and the other one, the fight got stopped early because of a illegal eye poke. So can't really say Sean O'Malley can hold anything against these guys that are fighting on the first fight of the main card. But Marlon Vera, I always thought that he probably should have got a rematch against Sean O'Malley, since Sean O'Malley has had like an arc that's just been going up and up to the point where he's getting a title shot before Marlon Vera, when Marlon Vera pretty much dominated him, kicked his ankle off, pretty much kicked him with leg kicks and ankle kicks till I don't know what happened in that fight. I don't know if it broke Sean O'Malley's ankle or whatever, but he folded, and that was like really one of the first fighters I think Sean O'Malley ever really fought, like a big name star, like a ranked fighter. But we're talking about Marlon Vera here at the moment. So he's 4-2 in his last in his last 6 fights, and his last fight he lost. It was a loss to Cody Sandhagen. It was just a split decision, and then prior to that he had was on a 4-fight win streak, fighting guys like beating guys, not just fighting them, but beating guys like Dominic Cruz, Rob Font, Frankie Edgar, Davey Grant, some big time names, So he was probably just kind of on the cusp of getting a title shot himself, but I don't know, that just sometimes happens. Lost a close one to Cody Sandhagen, and now he's at the bottom of the card, the main card at least, waiting for his opportunity, which I've heard Sean O'Malley say that if can't keep Sean O'Malley's name out of my mouth, but Sean O'Malley was saying in some interviews that if he beats Aljamain Sterling and gets the title, that he wants it, and then obviously if Marlon Vera wins his fight, he wants Marlon Vera to be the first challenger for his belt, which I don't know. Aljamain Sterling's had the belt for a while and has defended it several times. I would be surprised if depending on how he gets beat, I'd be just surprised if he doesn't get an automatic rematch. But Marlon Vera has also, it seems like all these fighters either have 19 or 29 fights. They all have about the same amount of fights. So he has 29 fights, 20 wins with 8 losses, and he's in the 20 wins, he has 8 wins by knockout, 8 wins by submission, 4 wins by decision, and then the 8 losses, all 8 have come by decision. So he shows you that tells you he's very durable. If anything, if nothing else, he's very durable. You're not going to knock him out. You're not going to submit him. And then he has 1 draw, which was far back. That was all the way back in 2013. Pedro Munez. So Pedro Munez had a fight with Sean O'Malley and got poked in the eye. All this kind of comes together after a while, and it was just Pedro Munez. He was unable to continue due to the accidental eye poke at 3 minutes and 9 seconds of the second round. But he hasn't had a great record, excluding that. So he's 2-3-1 in his last 6 fights. So he hasn't had a great luck recent history of fights, past fights and stuff. It hasn't been very lucky, but he did win his last fight, which was after the Sean O'Malley fight. He beat Chris Gutierrez by decision, and that was April 15, 2023. So that was this year. But he's also, once again, also has 29 fights with 20 wins, and 7 losses. In the 20 wins, he has 5 wins by knockout, 8 wins by decision, 8 wins by submission, 8 and 7 wins by decision. And then in the 7 losses, he's just like Marlon Vera. He's never been knocked out, never been submitted. All of his losses were all seven decision losses, and then he has 2 no contests, which obviously one was the eye poke, and I think another one was Nunez. It got turned over for PEDs. But I think I'm going to go with the guy that seems to have been closer to actually getting a title shot, and I'm going to go with Marlon Vera. I think this is going to be a pretty exciting fight. But I just have to go with the history that neither one of these guys have been stopped, never been finished. So I think Marlon Vera is going to win this by decision, and it should be an exciting fight. All right, on to the second fight on the main card. It's a bantamweight bout between Damon Blackshear versus Mario Batista, and this is a very the storyline leading up to this is Mario Batista was originally supposed to fight Cody Garbrandt, but then Cody Garbrandt pulled out, and Damon Blackshear stepped up for the opportunity. And I mean, he just fought. Damon Blackshear, he just fought August 12th, just like seven days ago, just like a week ago. He beat Josh Johnson with a twister at 3 minutes and 40 seconds of the first round, and that was the third twister finish by twister in UFC history. And now, just obviously, he didn't take much damage in that fight because he doesn't have any kind of injury, suspension, or anything like that, and he's jumping right back in there to fight Mario Batista. But he's had 14. I'll go over his last 6 fights real quick. He's 4-1-1 in his last 6 fights, and one of those was a draw. And in his total fights, he has 20 total fights with 14 wins, 5 losses, and 1 draw. And he has two of the wins. 2 of the 14 wins came by knockout TKO, 9 by submission, and 3 by decision. And then he's never been knocked out, never been submitted, but he's lost 5 by decision. So he's kind of similar to Pedro Munez and Marlon Vera in that regard, that he's durable, but he's obviously a ground specialist, a submission specialist, a Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu specialist with those 9 submission wins. And then we have Mario Batista, who was scheduled to fight Cody Garbrandt originally. So it's kind of interesting that he goes from fighting a fighter that's expected to fight, like his scheduled to fight Cody Garbrandt, who's more of a stand-up and striker, to a completely different style of fighter, and having to fight someone that's a submission artist and has ground game, Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu, and wrestling. So that's kind of taking a bit of a risk by Mario Batista in that regard. But he's been on a bit of a hot streak himself. He's 5-1 in his last 6 fights, and is on a 4-fight winning streak. And going off of that, he's had 14 fights, 12 wins and 2 losses. And in the 12 wins, he has 3 wins by knockout, 6 by decision, 6 by submission, 3 by decision, and 2 losses. And then in the 2 losses, he's been knocked out once and then submitted once. Has no decision losses. So he's kind of similar. Obviously he can submit you. In his last three fights, he's all had submission wins. Uh, One by rear naked choke, one by reverse arm triangle, and then another by rear naked choke. So he shows that he's got a ground game as well. And so that makes these guys are very similar fighters. That kind of makes this fight kind of tough to pick. But it seems like either of these guys are going to get submitted or that's about the main way that they're going to win. But I think I'm going to go with Damon Blackshear just because I'm impressed. I'm impressed, even though he doesn't have only the two losses on his record like Mario Batista. I'm impressed by the quick turnaround that he's taking here, and the risk that he's also taking a bit of a risk, having a turnaround fight like that. So I'm going to go with Damon Blackshear to get submission. I guess I think that's what I think. There's going to be a submission in this fight, regardless who wins. But I'm going to go Damon Blackshear because I respect that. I respect that quick turnaround. Want to fight. Sometimes you think these guys don't really want to fight. They're kind of protecting their record and kind of wanting to pad their stats. But he's obviously not doing that in this scenario. He definitely is taking his opportunity to have a fight on the main card. All right. So welterweight bout between Ian Machado Gary versus Neil Magny. These guys had kind of a funny back and forth with the pre-fight interviews. I don't know exactly what Neil Magny said about Ian Machado Gary. I think he said something about Neil Magny has children. He knows how to whoop their ass, so he's going to do the same thing to Ian Machado Gary. Ian Machado Gary, being he's from Ireland, he wouldn't get off of the fact that he was trying to accuse Neil Magny of like child abuse or something, like saying, "I can't believe you ever hurt a child." Like, oh man, get off. It was just a little ridiculous. Like, get off of that. He's trying to call Neil Magny a child beater or something, and he had the strong Irish accents and throwing out insults. That stuff's kind of worn out its welcome a little bit with with Conor McGregor. So, but the Boston crowd, they loved it, even though I thought it's been a little played out. But he seemed really upset and serious about Neil Magny possibly having put hands on his own children. I don't know. It was a weird back and forth between them. But hey, makes it a little more exciting. Got a little more of a storyline there. But he's got an impressive record over the last six fights. He's 6-0 in his last six fights, and he's 12-0 in his entire career. So he's undefeated in the 12 wins. He's had 7 wins by knockout, 1 by decision, and four wins by decision. So he's similar. Talking about Conor McGregor, seems like he kind of got a similar career arc. He's a knockout artist from Ireland, and he's smaller. Well, I guess he's not as small. I guess most of Conor McGregor's came at 155, but some of them towards I wouldn't say the end of his career because he's not done fighting yet. Well, we don't really know if Conor McGregor will fight again, but he fought some of his fights. Those fights with Nate Diaz were at 170, but he looked kind of small. But this guy's got an impressive length and size for a guy that's fighting at 170. He's 6'3", so that's kind of interesting. That obviously helps with his striking ability, which he has his last 2 fights came by TKO wins, one by head kick and punches, and another one just by punches. So it's a it's a big fight for Neil Magny, who Neil Magny has like all the most fights, I think. Pretty sure he has the most fights in welterweight history. Maybe just fights in general. He's had so many fights in the UFC. He's had like he's been fighting in the UFC since 2013. So for like 10 years, he has had tons of fights, but never had a title fight. Never had a shot at a title. I've always kind of looked at Neil Magny as kind of a stepping stone, kind of gatekeeper, and I think that's perfectly example of what he is here for Ian Machado Gary. Like Ian Machado Gary's stock will go way up if he beats Neil Magny, especially if he beats him in an impressive fashion. But Neil Magny in his last 6 fights, he's 4-2 with his last fight being a split decision win over Philip Rowe. Just want to look and see. It's been since 2018, November 17, 2018, when the last time Neil Magny was knocked out by Santiago Ponzinibbio. But he's had 38 fights. We talked about how he's had maybe the most fights in UFC history, or at least at the welterweight weight class. But he's had 38 fights, 28 wins and 10 losses. In the 28 wins, he has 7 wins by knockout, 4 by submission, and 17 by decision. So he's I've watched a lot of Neil Magny's fights. A lot of them can be drawn out and kind of boring, but I mean he gets the win, which that's all that matters. But then in his 10 losses, he's been knocked out twice, submitted 6 times, and 2 losses by decision. So I mean, just overall, just a long career with a bunch of fights. It has a pretty respectable career, but he's just never beat like any like real like marquee fighters. You know, he always puts a couple of fights together and maybe gets to fight a higher ranked fighter, but can never really pull off the win he needs to really move up in the rankings. So I think this is set up perfectly for Ian Machado Gary to win this fight. So I think that's who I'm going for. Both these guys are kind of strikers. That's mainly what they do. They're mostly stand-up fighters, and I think Ian Machado Gary, who's the young and up-and-coming fighter, he's only 25 years old and on that 12-fight win streak, undefeated, has majority of his wins come by knockout. I think I'm going to go in the welterweight bout between Ian Machado Gary versus Neil Magny. I'm going with Ian Machado Gary to get that get that knockout and bring back some reminiscence and memories of Conor McGregor. I think one of Conor McGregor's big breakout fights came back in 2013 in Boston. So I think you're going to be able to relive that a little bit if you're a Boston fan or an Irish fighting fan. All right, finally we are on to the co-main event. It's a women's strawweight bout between Zhang Weili versus Amanda Lemos, and Zhang Weili is the champion. Let's see here, Zhang Weili, she's had a kind of ups and downs in her career over the last 6 fights, and mostly kind of fought some of the same fighters multiple times over the careers, and most of her downs came to Rose Namajunas, and she's 4-2 in her last 6 fights, and the 2 losses both came to Rose Namajunas. One was like the first one was April 24th, 2021 at UFC 261, came by way of like devastating head kick, and then then November 6th in the same year, 2021, she had a close decision loss to Rose Namajunas. But she's also in that span of like 6 fights from 2019 to 2022. She's also beat Jonas John Jacek, she beat her twice. The first time was a close split decision where Yonan John Jacek's head, she looked like E.T. She looked like a gray alien, and then she retired John Jacek. She retired her with a devastating spinning back fist, completely slumped her over. She face planted after she landed that spinning back fist, and then she won the title back from Carla Esparza, who beat, pretty sure beat Rose Namajunas to take the belt from her, and then she turns around and beats Carla Esparza to regain the strawweight title. And she did that in pretty dominating fashion with a submission rear naked choke at 1 minute and 5 seconds of the second round. And she's had 26 total fights in her career, 23 wins, 3 losses. 11 of the wins came by knockout. So she's got a different type of knockout and power and uh, dynamite in those hands for a women's fighter, especially one that fights at just 115 pounds. You don't see that often. That a woman fighter that only weighs 115 pounds is out there slumping other females over. But then also has 8 wins by decision. So obviously, just like how she beat Carla Esparza, she can get a hold of your neck or get a hold of an arm and want to just pop it right off. And then has 4 losses by decision, and then has just the one loss by knockout, which came to Rose Namajunas in a title fight, and then 2 losses by decision. So should be for a women's title fight. This is going to be, I think there's going to be some excitement and some fireworks in this fight. And then she's fighting Amanda Lemos, who's a little bit of an older fighter, finally kind of getting her opportunity. She's 36 years old, I think. Zhang Weili is 34, so she's a little, even though she's never fought for the belt, she's finally getting her chance and really hasn't had a lot of fights, honestly. She's 5-1 in her last 6 fights. And a fighter that I kind of compare her to is Jessica Andrade, but she lost to her 3 fights back. That was her only loss in those 6 fights, was to Jessica Andrade, and she lost by arm triangle choke to her. I'm pretty sure, I want to see, pretty sure Zhang Weili has beat Jessica Andrade too. I think she fought both of them because she talked about how she thought uh, Lemos, even though she beat Lemos, she was talking about how she thought Lemos punched harder, hit harder, had more explosiveness in her hands. So maybe that's just a dig at someone that she's lost to in the past, that she would say something like that. Kind of an insult because she actually lost to Zhang Weili, but won against Lemos. So she kind of a way of patting herself on the back while patting the new challenger on the back at the same time. But Amanda Lemos has had 16 fights with 13 wins and 2 losses. 8 of the wins came by knockout, 3 by submission, 2 by decision, and then the 2 losses, 1 came by knockout and 1 by submission. Then she's had 1 draw. So I think I would say Zhang Weili probably has a more rounded skill set because she's had more fights by decisions, just had more fights in general. But I think both of them, for the weight class that they fight in, the straw weight class, the 115-pound weight class, both of them have knockout power. They're very dangerous women in the striking game. But I have to go. I have to go with Zhang Weili in this. So with the co-main event, women's strawweight bout, Zhang Weili versus Amanda Lemos, I got Zhang Weili, and I got her winning this by knockout. So I just don't think Amanda Lemos is. I think Zhang Weili is just kind of in a different stratosphere. She's on a different level, even though they have similar knockout to decision, submission, loss, victories, and all that business. But I just don't think Amanda Lemos is in the same category as Zhang Weili. Zhang Weili is kind of an elite fighter. I mean, the only person she really lost to in recent memory is Rose Namajunas, which everyone knows that she's an elite fighter. It'll be interesting to see when she's back and if there's a trilogy fight between her and Zhang Weili. But in the women's strawweight bout between Zhang Weili, the champion, versus the men Lemos, I got Zhang Weili winning this by knockout. All right, finally onto the main event of UFC 292, Sterling versus O'Malley. We have Aljamain Sterling, the champion, versus Sean O'Malley, and I'll just come right out and say it that I think I'm in a different boat sometimes when pulling for certain fighters and being a fan of certain fighters. Like uh, a lot of people don't think that Aljamain Sterling should even be the champion because he got the DQ win over Peter Yan, but then he fought him again and beat him in a close decision. And then the fights after that were against like an injured TJ Pillishaw, you know, so probably shouldn't even really got that fight. So kind of like a washed up TJ Pillishaw, and then you could argue maybe even a washed up Henry Cejudo in his last fight, a guy that hadn't fought in like 3 years, retired like 3 years ago. But Aljamain Sterling, he has the most wins, I believe, most wins in the most wins in the bantamweight division, and he has and if he wins this fight, he'll have the most title defenses as well. So that'll be 4 title defenses if he wins, and he's on a long fight streak, winning streak. Has on a 9-fight winning streak, which obviously there's a lot of people, fans out there that would debate whether he should have won either fight against Peter Yan, and then obviously there's people out there probably argue that TJ Pillishaw and Henry Cejudo were both kind of washed up, but I'm a fan of him. I think he's a very good fighter and has great wrestling ability. I think people don't like him because he plays a good backpack. He likes to get on people's back and play for that rear naked choke, but sometimes he'll just literally ride it out. And I think a lot of people just don't like his style. Some people may say it's kind of boring, maybe kind of similar to Tyron Woodley in his prime, but he's in his 26 fights, he has 23 wins and just 3 losses. In the 23 wins, he has 3 by knockout, 8 by submission, and 11 by decision. And then has obviously you don't see that very often where it's like a win by disqualification, but he has a win and a title change at the same time. And then in 3 losses, he has only been knocked out once and has 2 losses by decision. And his loss was back. Well, the knockout loss was back at December 9th, 2017. Marlon Morales was KO'd by a knee at 1 minute and 7 seconds of the first round, but he's been on a tear ever since. But like I said, there's always haters out there that probably think that he's not as good as he is, as he's and worthy of holding the bantamweight title. But in the same breath, I say that I'm kind of a fan of Aljamain Sterling. I'm not really a fan of Sean O'Malley. So it's kind of funny. I think there's a lot of people that probably big Sean O'Malley fans. Most of the Boston crowd was cheering for Sean O'Malley and saying Aljamain Sterling sucked. But I'm just in complete reverse of that because at the same time, people will say that Aljamain Sterling didn't win any legitimate fights or hasn't fought like any great title, defended the title against any great fighters. But at the same time, I'd probably say the same thing about Sean O'Malley because I mean, the last 2 fights against any 2 real quality fighters, which was Peter Yan and Pedro Munez, he poked poked Pedro Munez in the eye at 1 minute and 51 seconds of the second round. And so we never got to see the true outcome of that fight, what actually was going to happen. And then in his last win over Peter Yan, which was a split decision, that was October 22nd, 2022 at UFC 280. I thought Peter Yan. I thought it was pretty clear that Peter Yan won that fight and was kind of setting it up again to get a. I guess it would have been a trilogy fight against Aljamain Sterling, but that's not how it played out. And, but in his last 6 fights, he is 4-1-1 with the no contest and the classic and iconic loss. I think people don't highlight the fact that Marlon Vera is like the only person that beat him and pretty much dominated him with those ankle and calf kicks, and then finished him with elbows and punches. So I would say I'm more of a fan of Marlon Vera than I am even of Sean O'Malley. And obviously, people know Sean O'Malley. He's his fighting style. He's definitely a striker, a knockout artist. Going to get that highlight reel, put you on YouTube with the highlight knockout. But he's had 18 fights with 16 wins, and then the one loss. And I'm talking about his knockout ability. He has 11 wins by knockout, 1 win by submission, 4 by decision, and then the 1 loss was where he got knocked out. It was TKO. He wasn't knocked out cold. It was more because his ankle was injured than anything. But still, he showed he's kind of slight, got a bit of a slight frame and skinny legs that he couldn't handle those leg kicks and ankle kicks, calf kicks from Marlon Vera. And then he has 1 no contest where he poked our boy Pedro Munez, who's fighting on this card, in the eye. So we never really got to see the outcome of that. But we know what Sean O'Malley wants to do. He wants to get the takedown, and these guys were Sean O'Malley didn't have as much to say during pre-fight interviews that he has in the past and leading up to some fights, and how much he had to say. He may have been a little drunk after Aljamain Sterling's title fight victory over Henry Cejudo when he came in the cage, and everyone remembers him handing his jacket to Dylan Danis, who's actually a training partner with Aljamain Sterling. Dylan actually put his coat on, and that caused like almost a brawl in the cage after that fight. But I'm it's being a fan or a hater, but I'm going with the guy that's had leading up to this. He's going to have the most fights in the bantamweight weight class, and I think he's going to get the break the record for most defenses as well. So it goes that way sometimes of who you want to win, or who you're a fan of, or who you're not a fan of. But in the bantamweight, the main event, it's a bantamweight bout between Aljamain Sterling, the champion, versus Sean O'Malley, the Sean O'Malley challenger. I'm going with Aljamain Sterling, and I think he's going to win this by submission. I think he's going to get a play a backpack man. Both these guys like to walk around with designer backpacks, but I think on August 19th, 2023 at the TD Garden in Boston, Massachusetts, Sean O'Malley is going to be wearing Aljamain Sterling as a backpack, and I think Aljamain Sterling might get that rear naked choke or submit him in some other fashion. But anyways, let's go over these picks here real quick. So we have a bantamweight bout. First fight on the main card, we have bantamweight bout between Marlon Vera versus Pedro Munez. Both of these guys are very durable fighters, so I could see it going a decision either way. But I'm going to go with Marlon Vera because just talking about being a fan more than just a picker. Trying to pick for doing predictions. And then in the bantamweight bout between Damon Blackshear versus Mario Batista. I'm going with Damon Blackshear, and I'm thinking he's going to get a submission. I think he's going to submit Mario Batista because I'm also picking him because I respect that uh, ability and want to fight and not turn around and not, even if it's a day later wanting to fight again. I like that. And then in the third fight, it's a welterweight bout between Ian Machado Gary versus Neil Magny. And I'm sorry, Neil Magny. I just look at you as kind of a gatekeeper, a stepping stone. And I think that's what the UFC matchmakers perfectly did here. And I'm going with Ian Machado Gary to knock Neil Magny out. And then the co-main event, the women's strawweight bout for the title is Zhang Wei Li, the champion, versus Amanda Lemos, and I got Zhang Wei Li to win this by knockout. I just don't think I don't think Amanda Lemos is on Zhang Wei Li's level, not yet at least, even for an aging fighter. So, and then in the main event, we have the bantamweight title bout between Aljamain Sterling, champion, versus Sean O'Malley. And call it being a fan, call it being a hater. I think most people are probably more fans of Sean O'Malley than they are Aljamain Sterling. But I can say that I'm a fan of Aljamain Sterling. I think he's going to show out on the ground and show a tough uh, ground game and wrestling game that Sean O'Malley's never experienced. So I got Aljamain Sterling to win this by submission. But this card, this will be the first time really where I'm expecting to watch all the preliminary card, and it's every fight has some interest to it, and I'm ready. I'm ready for Saturday night, and hopefully my picks go the way they go, and same with you. If you got different picks, I'm sure you're hoping they go the way you go, the way you picked them. But anyways, I think that's all I have for you this evening. So with that, can I get a check, please?